we're going to go ahead and record the call too, so that we will have that documented for everybody. If you want to go back and listen to something, if you have friends who are unable to make the call tonight, we'll send you information about where that's housed and how you can access it. So let's dive into what we're going to talk about tonight. And before we actually get into the substance of it, I want to give you a little bit of background about Reform California and why we're here. I know many of you have been involved in Reform California in previous campaigns, but just as a reminder, and for those who are new, Reform California is a joint campaign of the Union for Reform Judaism, the Religious Action Center, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis. And we all are working together across lines of race, class, and faith on issues of justice in our state. So tonight is kind of sort of a first for us. It's the first time we're doing a webinar, and while we are virtual, this is one of the largest gatherings we have ever had, and it's really pretty exciting. Reform California has been growing steadily over the last 5 years. We've had successful campaigns already and issues related to immigration and the Trust Act, increasing affordable housing through cap and trade allocations, and ending racial profiling. And tonight is the launch of our next campaign, Tikkun Tikvah. Tikkun Tikvah is going to continue our racial justice work to help restore hope, reform sentencing, and engage voters. There are two main prongs to this campaign, and we're going to be talking about both of them tonight. One part of it is we are going to be working for the passage of Proposition 57, the Public Safety and Rehabilitation Act, which is one of the initiatives on, one of the many initiatives that will be on your November ballot. And the other prong of this is increasing voter registration and turnout. Our program tonight is also in two parts. The first 45 minutes of our program tonight, we're going to be dealing with the substance of our campaign, and then we will spend another half an hour focusing on the nuts and bolts, how you and your congregation can be involved in this campaign. That latter portion of it, the last 30 minutes or so, are designed for clergy and professionals and lay leaders who want to take a leadership role in bringing Tikkun Tikvah to your congregations. But everybody is invited to stay on, whether you are not sure whether you are one of those people yet or not, and we hope that you will. In the first 45 minutes, we have a number of pretty incredible speakers who are going to be talking to us tonight, and I want to just give you a brief outline so you sort of know what the format for tonight is going to be. We're going to start off tonight with some words of Torah and teaching from Rabbi Julie Sachs-Taller, who I will introduce more formally in a second. We're going to hear from Martin Cruz, who has been incarcerated and is directly affected by the criminal justice system, who will help us learn how families and individuals and communities are affected by incarceration. We are then going to be joined by Dana Williamson, who is the general consultant for the Prop 57 campaign and a former cabinet secretary to Governor Brown. And we are then going to have Lori Stein, who is a past president of LEOBAC, talking a little bit about what we can do on the Tikkun Tikvah campaign together. And then, as I said, we'll go into the nuts and bolts, and Lee Winkleman and Rabbi Jessica Kirshner will be handling that part of it. So I think it's going to be a really phenomenal evening. So one of the questions that has come up in many of our congregations as we started talking about what might be a good topic for Reform California this year, and we started talking about sentencing reform, the question came up about why sentencing reform? Why is that a Jewish issue? And in order to explain that to us and do a little teaching for us, I'm really pleased that Rabbi Julie Sachs-Taller from Shereth Israel in San Francisco, and who is a member of the Reform California leadership team, is with us now. And Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer. Can you hear me? Okay, terrific. Hi, everybody. It's amazing to think that I'm sitting in a living room in San Francisco and talking to people from congregations all over the state. That is fantastic. In order to give a good Jewish talk, I need to be able to say on the one hand and on the other hand. Let's see, I'll try to get my hands into the camera there. But to answer the question, why is sentencing reform Jewish? And why is it important to me? I'm going to have to pretend that I have three hands. So please pretend with me as I go forward and wish that for the moment I had three hands. On the one hand, sentencing reform and the larger context of changing our criminal justice system is important to me personally, and maybe important to you personally and as Jews, simply because it's important. It's one of the most vital and urgent issues of our time, affecting millions of people who are in prison, millions more who are their families and communities, and of course, actually affecting all of us, because we are all interconnected as a society and as human beings. Living Jewishly means addressing the important issues of our society. There is no way to live a full Jewish life and to say that any unsolved crisis of our society or of our time doesn't matter to us as Jews. Okay, that was the one hand. Now, on the other hand, or the second hand, we can give a much more specific answer to why sentencing reform is important to us. Law, and specifically how people who commit crimes are judged, are sentenced, and are treated is deeply important. It's a huge section of Jewish teaching from the Torah on. And so just to give one example, an example with detail that shows by looking at this one detail, we are reminded of the voluminous amount of Torah, Talmud, and later legal material in our history and in our library as Jews. I'll just read you one little section from Maimonides, actually as adapted by Rabbi Aryeh Cohen. It says, Maimonides, centuries ago, the function of arresting a person and bringing him or her in front of the court should not be assigned to someone who is not well versed in the law and who knows well the definition of a transgression. It already happens many times that a person is arrested, and in the course of this person's arrest, it becomes clear that the person didn't do anything wrong. Or this person is brought into court, and only there it becomes clear that he or she did nothing wrong at all. But in the meantime, much damage has been caused to this person, both materially and psychologically. And all this is because it seemed to the officer or the police that this person had broken the law. And therefore, even short-term arrest must be done with care. So I bring this piece of Torah in the largest sense, not to speak about it in detail, but just to remind ourselves how important law is to us as Jews and to our contribution to the world. We approach setting the world right not only through individual acts of kindness and even justice, but through a communal system of law that is meant to guide us and to support our building a society together. As Jews, we know that a dependable and just legal system is a vital communal need. And now for my third hand. On the third hand, I believe that transforming our inconsistent and even corrupted criminal justice system into a real and dependable system of justice is actually something we do for ourselves as a Jewish community. We know from our own history that when any group of people is persecuted, as is happening now through the sham of the war on drugs and the resulting mass incarceration of people of color and poor people, when any group is persecuted, we are endangered as Jews. In addition to all the other reasons, anti-Semitism, the blaming of and targeting of our community, is used as a pressure valve to divert the anger of larger persecuted groups and to fracture collective organizing by the majority of people. Of course, this that I've just brought up could be the topic of a much longer talk, but I bring it up now because I think it's important for when we identify our reasons to coming to the table in coalitions for justice, that we explicitly talk about our reasons being not only that we show up because of our values, we show up because of our history, not only the history of what's happened to us as Jews in history, but the proud history of organizing and working for justice of our people. But in addition, we do this work because we understand that we too need justice for all people. We know in our blood and our bones that injustice to any is dangerous for all of us. It's helpful for us to be honest about this self-interest in justice, because in some ways, it levels the table when we approach a coalition, as we're going to be doing in this campaign. So those are all my hands. And I'll end by just saying that in thinking about the many ways that each of us is affected by the criminal justice system and its working or not working, I personally have had my car stolen 5 times. And in each time, I had contact with the police and at times a choice of how to present what had happened, what kind of damage had been done. And I have to say that I noted that instead of being worried only for myself and my car, right, I was worried, as we all should be. We might worry about the person who stole something because we're worried about their well-being, or maybe they wouldn't have stolen if they didn't need it. But I was not only worried about that. I was worried about what would happen in their contact with the police because I was worried they wouldn't be treated fairly. And that's just one slice of one small reason that we need a justice system from every angle. We need it for when we do something wrong. We need it when something wrong is done to us. And we need it because as a society, we need to be standing on firmer ground than we're standing now. Thanks.
Julie is lucky enough to be in San Francisco with the room full of her congregants there, which the rest of us are clapping virtually, Julie. That's great. Thank you so much for starting us off on a wonderful note.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll go on mute.
Okay. We next want to turn to Martin Cruz, who I hope is with us. Martin is from 2 different organizations. He's here from the Anti-Recidivism Coalition and also from Beit Teshuvah, which is a Jewish spiritual community, a residential recovery, and a re-entry center in LA. And as I mentioned earlier, Martin is here to share with us his experiences in terms of the criminal justice system and how that can affect all of us. And we're going to do this as sort of a little bit of eavesdropping on a conversation. Lee Winkleman is going to participate in a conversation with Lee, so he is unmuted as well. And Martin, welcome. And Lee, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Martin, for joining us tonight. How are you doing today? We can't hear you. We cannot hear you. He's unmuted too, so I don't know. You might need to call in, Adam, to the number because I All right, well, we're having technical difficulties. Jen, do you think we should move ahead?
Should we go ahead and just kind of reorganize a little bit here?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, Dana, are you there? Yeah, terrific. Okay, so we're going to switch gears. We'll come back to Martin after we talk to Dana, and actually that'll work out really well, I think, anyway. As I mentioned earlier, Dana Williamson is the general consultant for the Prop 57 campaign, the initiative that we are going to be working on this fall. She's also a former cabinet secretary to Governor Brown and knows a ton about Prop 57 and is going to talk us sort of the ins and outs of the proposition so that we have a better grounding ourselves in terms of what the proposition is all about. So Dana, thank you for being with us tonight, and let me turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me tonight. So a little background, I I was Jerry Brown's cabinet secretary for the last 5 years, which meant that I was in charge of all the state agencies throughout government. But the truth is that I really love politics. And so I decided to leave in March and start consulting. He, at the same time, was doing an initiative. So I'm still with him. And I think, just to give a little background from where the governor was about this initiative, I think that most of you know of his time he spent in the seminary back in the 70s. And it comes through in all of his policy making, but no less than this particular initiative. When he was governor the first time, he signed a law on determinate sentencing. And at the time, a lot of people were being put in jail for disparate sentences. Mostly people of color were getting longer sentences than Caucasian folks were getting. So there was a big push to come up with a more, what they believed at the time, a fair system. And so if you committed X crime, you got 15 years. If you committed Y crime, you got 10 years. But what that created was a system that was really unforgiving. It was really inflexible for people who had reformed themselves earlier than that. And it didn't give people hope. And so what happened is a lot of inmates ended up turning to gangs and just not wanting to do anything to change maybe the behavior that they had, or if they had sort of changed, nobody knew it because they just kind of sat quietly until they were released. And this has sat with him for literally 40 years. And so fast forward to this tenure as governor, he has talked about this a lot. We inherited a huge deficit. We did Prop 30. We needed a rainy day fund. We needed a lot of things for the state. But this particular thing was always very close to his heart. So, hi. So he started talking about it a lot, and he was trying to figure out what we could do. What could we do to change the system? And we actually worked with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition with Scott Budnick and others who were working on a juvenile component of some sentencing reform, and we now have what is now Prop 57. So Prop 57 does four things. One, it allows parole consideration for people with nonviolent convictions who've completed the full prison term for their primary offense. And what that means is you could be in prison for several offenses, but if you've completed the first term, you now have an opportunity to go before the parole board, and you have to have demonstrated that you've rehabilitated yourself and reformed yourself, but you at least get a shot. The second piece is it authorizes the Secretary of Corrections to establish a system of credits to do the same thing. If you do the work, you get education credits, you get rehabilitation credits, then you could actually get out of prison sooner. And then the third major thing it does, and this is something that a lot of the juvenile advocates had really worked hard on, is Pete Wilson and the DA's Association actually did a proposition a few years back called Proposition 21. And Prop 21 made it so that district attorneys are allowed to what they call direct file folks who've been arrested. And what that means for kids is that within 48 hours, a district attorney is deciding that a juvenile who could be as young as 14 either goes to the adult system or goes to the juvenile system. And countless studies have shown that when a juvenile goes to the adult system, they often stay there for the rest of their lives or come in and out of jail because they just don't have access to the same rehabilitation programs that exist in the juvenile system. And so what this initiative does is it hands that power, instead of to a district attorney who may or may not know the circumstances, hands that power back to a judge. So what happens is now a juvenile, if they commit a crime, they go before a juvenile judge, and the juvenile judge hears both sides and decides, do they go to the adult system or do they go to the juvenile system? And if, we can, talk a lot about this, but, anybody who we've talked to who's been in prison, who has either known someone that's gone to the adult system or stayed in the juvenile system, has a tremendous impact on their lives and the lives of their families. So those are the three big components of it. The fourth component of it is that the Secretary of Corrections actually has to certify, once we do regulations to implement all of this, that it is consistent with enhancing and protecting public safety. Because the entire premise of this is to not only have a more just prison system, but to have a safer public when people go out. If you're gonna go out into the community, people are just better off if they've gone through rehab and they've done the work than if they go out and they've been in gangs or they have, not done anything to improve themselves. They go back out into society and they very often come back in. So that's the simplicity of the measure. It's actually pretty short. It's 4 pages long. And I will tell you then all the time I've known Jerry Brown, I've never heard him be more passionate about something. If he were here, he would tell you that this is more about giving people the chance of hope and to redeem themselves than it is anything else. And there's probably not another governor that would take it on, because I don't know if folks have seen the press, but we've got, the DA's Association coming after him very personally. But this is super important to him. And I think for all of us who believe that people can learn and improve, this is a really big deal. So that's pretty much the summary of it, and I was happy to take questions later.
That's great. Thanks, Dana. I think I just want to remind everybody that if you move your cursor to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box, and you can post questions there at any point. And I think we have the sound logistics fixed now with Martin. So Martin, I hope you heard me introduce you before. We're really glad that you're here. And Lee, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself too, and I'm going to turn this over to a conversation for the two of you, and then maybe we can have some questions for both Dana on the political level and Martin on a practical level.
Hey, Martin, how you doing?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Good. So nice to hear your voice.
Yeah.
So, Martin, can you tell us a little bit about your early life and why you joined a gang?
Well, growing up, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. I was raised in Compton, California, and there were these like many issues within our family. My dad drinking a lot, him fighting with my mom, and the love just wasn't there. The support that I was looking for just wasn't there, and eventually it led me to just hang out in the streets with a few friends of mine that were growing up together, and I guess the guys from from the gang, from the neighborhood gang, were right there, and they would see us hanging out, so eventually they brought us in, and I guess that kind of led me into like me thinking that was a sort of love that I was looking for and support. So that's what eventually led me into a gang.
Thank you. Thank you. And then can you talk about your sentencing, and were you tried and sentenced as an adult or a juvenile?
Okay, so at the age of 17, December 31st, 2008, I was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, personal use of a firearm, and PC 245. I was my first court day, I was supposed to get direct filed, but I was able to get a lawyer, and my biggest thing was just trying to remain in juvenile court, because I guess my lawyer would share a lot to me about how was it in the CDCR, and I guess they didn't provide the sufficient programs for us, the rehabilitation that I needed to get myself back together and pretty much get myself ready to come back out into society if I was able to get that opportunity. But throughout my period of time in juvenile halls and fighting my trial and everything, I pretty much had good behavior. I had the opportunity to be in a good unit at juvenile hall. They were giving me I was seeing therapists there. I was seeing other few people that were like mentors to me, and eventually my judge leaned more towards keeping me in juvenile court, and that's what happened. And I was sentenced to the Department of Juvenile Justice, aka Youth Authority, and there I took fully advantage of the opportunities that I had there, getting involved in all the programs, all the sessions that I would have with my counselors there, avoiding the gang activity. It was easier for me, and I kind of like, it makes me, I'm just very grateful for that opportunity. Like, I can really say that was like one of the best things that ever happened to me. Prison, I think it would have been different. I wouldn't have that opportunity. I think I would have probably been involved in politics and all that jailhouse rules, and it's just, that's no way of rehabilitation. And so I ended up just doing my time, and eventually I ended up meeting Scott Budnick as well, my mentor, and he gave me an opportunity he helped me get into a fire camp. And once I was in that fire camp, that's when I learned my trade of firefighting. And through Scott Budnick, once I was released from CYA or DJJ, he gave me an opportunity to continue firefighting out here, and I did that for about a year, and I continued doing that, and one thing led to another. I guess I'm not perfect, so I kept making little mistakes here and there, but I guess just through the support that I got from him, and the knowledge that I gained from DJJ, it was easier for me to get by and cope with things that I was dealing with out here.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. How do you think about your crime now?
My crime, That's a hard question. I to this day I think about it. I like to this day I feel some regret. I feel that what I was doing at the time was very wrong. I wish I wish I was thinking how I was thinking today. I wish I would have listened to myself before, so I would have never made those mistakes or felt that I needed to be loved by someone else that was making me do stuff that was hurting other people. But I just it made me like, I guess what, through DJJ and CY or CYA, it made me realize like what I was doing was very wrong, and I wasn't getting anywhere. It was just, it was either life in prison or it wasn't leading me nowhere. And I learned a lot about my commitment offense. I learned about how that ripple effect, how I affected my victim, their family, my community, and in detail, not justifying it, taking full responsibility, and it truly changed me. And it's been it's sad to say, but it was a great lesson for me to just learn from that, to get me away from all that, the things that I was doing in the past. And I look forward to the future now, and I'm just very thankful for the juvenile system. It taught me a lot of things, and I'm here today speaking to you guys.
Oh, that's really moving, Martin. Do you think you'd be at the same place you are now if you'd been tried as an adult and gone to adult prison?
I think I'll still be in jail. I would have probably still been in jail right now, probably doing live, or probably getting involved in politics. I don't know. It's difficult. I don't even want to think about that. Like, it's just somewhere I don't want to be at all, and I don't think anyone deserves that.
And where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Within 5 years, renewing my certifications for wildland firefighting, and continue to advocate such as things like this, and eventually moving on to municipal firefighting. And I'm a dad today, so just being a great father to my daughter.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Martin, for sharing your story. I know it's not easy to talk about it, and we really appreciate it. It really helps us understand the human side of the criminal justice system. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me here.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Lee. Martin, really, thank you. That was it was moving. I think it is a new angle on this for a lot of us who have not had personal connections with the criminal justice system, and I think you painted a beautiful picture for us for why we are embarking on a campaign to restore hope. So thank you for being with us. We have a couple of questions for Dana right now. So Dana, if you want to unmute yourself. And again, if anybody has questions for Martin or for Dana, please feel free to type them in the box and we will take care of answering them for you. We had one question from Jonathan Simon, who wanted to know how parole assessment is going to work. Is it similar to what's done now for prisoners, for either regular prisoners, for lifers? How is that? What's that system going to be?
That's a good question. So both the credit provision and the parole provision of the initiative require regulations to actually adopt them. So what will happen is if the initiative passes, it'll go through, there'll be draft regulations developed by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Those then go through a public process where folks can chime in and then they get adopted. Right now, the state is under a court order from a federal judge because our prison population had gone over a cap. And so we have a system in place now where there's a pre-screening process for, if you have committed a crime while in prison, if you have committed certain pretty heinous crimes, you get screened out and don't actually go to parole to begin with. And then the parole board, people go before the parole board and they have to demonstrate they've been rehabilitated, they've done the work, and then the parole board will decide. So that's the gist of it, but those details will get worked out. Okay,
great. And then Bill Schechner had a question wanting to know whether there was any polling right now that's available that shows where the proposition stands right now as the campaign starts.
Yes, so we've done a couple polls. A lot of these issues have been polled a lot over the years by different organizations. The initiative itself, when voters first read it, tests in the high 60s, low 70s, which is a great place to start. And then, if our opposition has their way, they'll try to scare everybody to death, and that definitely takes its toll. But our hope is that, we'll be able to mount a good campaign, and that won't happen.
Can you talk a little bit more about the opposition? Who are the groups that are most likely or have already come out in opposition? Who else might be coming out? And are there any efforts underway to try to bridge some of the gaps and maybe turn some of that opposition into either neutral or positive support for the proposition?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is a lot of organizations have not yet taken a position. So there's a couple law enforcement groups in LA that are opposed to it. The California District Attorneys Association is the primary opponent to this. We do have some law enforcement support. We have the California probation chiefs who are supportive, League of Women Voters. So there's different groups that are just kind of all coming along now. The governor's office, before this was filed, spent a lot of time, the governor himself, because they sat in on a lot of the conversations, talking to a lot of folks in the field. He talked to individual DAs, he talked to former judges, he talked to current judges, he talked to juvenile advocates, he talked to academics, you name it, he talked to them in developing this initiative. And I think that, folks, I think across the board really understand what we're trying to get at with the initiative. The DA's Association just doesn't agree that this is the best approach, and we wouldn't agree that their approach is the best approach. So, sometimes people just disagree.
Okay. Linda Herman wanted to know how we can best respond to questions relating to upticks in crime that local communities have experienced. Some believe it's related to the early release program as a result of Prop 47, and how this plays into that, and what a good response to those kinds of concerns might be.
That's a really good question. So crime is actually up nationally. There were several years, especially in California, where it had gone down. And different communities are experiencing different upticks in crime. So it's pretty difficult to determine what the cause is at this point. There's anecdotal conversations about Prop 47, an uptick in crime because of Prop 47, but it's really, that hasn't even been enacted for, it's less than a year now, so I think it's super hard to determine that. So I think if the question's asked, the answer is, crime statistics are really complicated. Every community is different. It's hard to pin it on any one thing.
Okay. And Ellen Israel, I'm really sorry, I can't tell you where people are from because all I'm getting are names people, but we've got people from all over the state here. Ellen Israel wanted to know how many people you think are going to be affected by Prop 57. And she notes that Martin's case and his treatment all happened without that being in effect, and whether that was an unusual situation and what the ramifications of having the initiative enacted would be.
Also a good question. There's a number. So if you took every person that has a non-violent felony conviction that's sitting in prison right now, that's 40,000 people. And that's what the District Attorneys Association has been telling people, is these are all the people that are going to get out. However, a lot of those people are going to get pre-screened out, and you start going through the process that I talked about. And so we think it's probably 4,000 to 5,000 people that are impacted right away. Because a lot of these, not a lot, most of these policies are in place now. So that'll just be a kind of a continuation of it. And then, who knows what'll happen over the years. So it's not a huge number, but those are still people's lives who, are impacted. Martin's case, I've heard a ton of stories since I started working on this, very similar to his. In fact, one of our partners, who is now a juvenile advocate and lawyer, his name is Frankie Guzman, and he actually was in a gang. He and another person, same age as he was, participated in armed robbery. Frankie went to the juvenile system, and his partner went to the adult system. And Frankie is now a lawyer and advocating, and his partner is still in the adult system. And so if you heard his story, he would tell you a lot of the same things Martin did, is that they got to avail themselves of this. So yes, it exists. But what happens right now is that literally within 48 hours, a DA is deciding. They're making that decision up front. And so, Martin, I don't know in your case, but did you have a judge sort of decide that you were going to stay in the judicial or in the juvenile system? I don't know how.
my DA was the one that was pretty much pressing up for me to go to adult court, but at the end of the trial, at the end of the trial, I guess my good behavior made my judge lean towards me staying in juvenile court.
Yeah. So, and every DA is different, and I don't want to disparage any particular DA and the process that they go through, because they make, the decisions, I'm sure, the best they can. But in Martin's case, the DA was pushing for that and the judge decided otherwise. And so I think that the whole idea here is that a judge is going to hear the entire set of facts. They're not just going to make the decision based on what, they see on paper or a very quick look at it. And so we think that will end up benefiting more folks.
That's great. We have 1.5 questions left, and I think we have time to take them. And I'm going to do sort of the half question first because I'm going to respond to it. Rabbi Paula Marcus from Temple Bethel and Aptos asked whether we have stories like these that have surfaced in our congregations. And I am sure that we do. And I'm going to take it on myself, and I hope, Lee and Jessica, you're okay with this. If you know of situations like this in your congregations, please let Lee and Jessica know. We are going to be doing a lot of educational programs, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. And having that kind of wealth of stories there would be just terrific. We've got one short question and one longer question. And I think then we'll have to stop on the questions just so that we have time for this. This is great that everybody is so engaged in this. We have one sort of a technical question from David Stern, who wants to know why this is being done as an initiative rather than through legislative process. And the second question, I'll give you both of them now, is from Kieran Zucker, who wants to know how evidence of racial inequality in arrests is going to be used in this campaign in terms of the needs for sentencing reform, given that discrimination plays a role in the entire criminal justice process from the time somebody is stopped to the time somebody's convicted or appealing. So I'll let you take those two questions, and there we go.
Okay, so on why it's not being done in the legislative process. So the initiative has both a constitutional component and a statutory component. The constitutional component you can't do through the legislative process. It is, we are changing things that were a part of Prop 21, which was decided on by the voters. And so by law, you have to do that through the initiative process. The statutory pieces of this is really the juvenile piece. And the juvenile piece, this issue has been batted around and it just hasn't kind of made it through the legislative process. And so, we decided it had been long enough and it needed to go to the voters.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dana. This is really, really helpful. And I appreciate your time.
Well, do you want me to answer the,
I'm sorry, I forgot about the other. Yeah.
I was like, wait.
Yeah.
So obviously in a political campaign, you're going to choose messages that resonate best with the widest variety of voters. And so we're going to be pretty consistent with our messaging at a high level. The issue of race is a big one, though, for a lot of people. And so we are going to be talking about that. We're actually in the process of revamping our website that's going to include a lot of studies about racial disparity and also, what happens with kids when they go to the juvenile system versus the adult system. So, yes. That's
great. Thank you. If people come up with other questions or you think of things, later tonight or when you're talking to friends, please don't be shy about emailing anybody at Reform California, either Lee at the email address I gave you. You can post on the Reform California Facebook site, but we would really like to get conversations going. So that's this is a wonderful start to all of that. I want to thank you, Dana. I want to turn the program now over to Lori Stein, who, as I mentioned, is a past president of Leo Back Temple in Los Angeles. She's also a member of the Reform California Leadership Group. And Lori's going to talk a little bit about what we as Reform Jews can do to help pass this ballot measure. So, Lori, let me turn it over to you.
Hi. So, if you watched President Obama in Dallas yesterday, he was very blunt when he acknowledged that racial bias is in our criminal justice system. And he said, we must reject despair in favor of forging consensus, fighting cynicism, and finding the will to make change. So our Tikkun Tikvah campaign represents our own will to stand up for racial justice. And I'm just going to give you a little tease of the three main points of Tikkun Tikvah, the three parts, and share the contours of them with you. And if you would like to stay tuned to this last half hour, you'll get more details. But there are basically, as I said, 3 things. First, we want to make sure that all Reform Jews know about Proposition 57, and they also need to know why it's a Jewish issue. And so we'll be talking to our fellow congregants about casting their vote for racial justice on November 8th. Now, this is easier said than done because there are a whopping 17 ballot measures this year and a boisterous presidential election, and not to mention whatever other local initiatives there'll be on our ballots. So I think we need to work with tremendous focus and discipline to make sure that Proposition 57 doesn't just get buried. Reform California is going to provide model educational events that you can use or adapt in your own congregation. We're going to arrange for collective visits to prisons. And I think we'll be using the High Holy Days to reach people about sentencing reform, about Prop 57, and about voter engagement. The second thing that we're going to do is to work hard on voter turnout. In California, what we know is that those who vote are white and older than the general population. So we are going to be partnering with congregations of color to make sure that everyone votes. What we know is that Prop 57 will not pass unless the communities most affected by the criminal justice system turn out and vote. And so to that end, in Reform California, we're going to plan some canvassing work, phone banks, and we will also work with congregations of color to reach all the new and irregular voters. And we'll also be using the most advanced technology and voter engagement techniques. The last thing that we'll be doing is we're going to be gathering together in Sacramento in September. We don't know the exact date yet. I think it's pending the governor's schedule. And we'll be doing this with other faith traditions. We'll be rallying to build momentum toward November 8th. We hope to speak with Governor Brown. And we will be talking about the future of criminal justice reform with advocates and legislators. You know, last week, if you were like me, your sorrow and despair at some point pivoted to moral outrage. And so I was thinking about that, and the quote from Heschel came to my mind. It said, "It's few are guilty, but all are responsible." And so I believe if we work rigorously and systematically to educate our fellow Reform Jews and to reach out to new voters and infrequent voters, we will pass Prop 57, and I think we will take some steps forward for racial justice in our state.
Thank you, Lori. We're going to be turning to the nuts and bolts part of our program. But before we do that, I just want to, because I know there will be some people who are getting off, I want to make 3 asks of you. First of all, for those of you that tweet or that have Facebook accounts, we are asking you to help publicize the Tikkun Tikvah campaign. We will be sending out some sample tweets and posts so that you can get some idea of what might be appropriate and help you do that in an expeditious way. So keep your eyes open, but we need you to help publicize the campaign, so that would be a huge help for us. Secondly, I mentioned that Reform California has a Facebook page. We encourage you to like it and to follow it. If you go onto Facebook, look for Reform California using CA, the postal abbreviation Reform CA. And we'd really like to get conversations going on that Facebook page too, and have it be a place where people can express their enthusiasm, suggest ideas for the campaigns, ask questions. And we really hope that you will utilize it. And finally, I just want to ask you to please make sure you keep your eyes open for announcements of further webinars. As the campaign develops, we're going to be having more educational opportunities like this. It's, it's obviously much better when we can all be together, but it's fabulous that we're all across the state and have to utilize this kind of technology to meet together. So keep your eyes open for that. So for those of you that do have to get off, thank you for being here. I hope all of you will stay on, though. And I'm going to turn this over to Rabbi Jessica Kirshner for some words of inspiration as we kind of transition from the theoretical, the aspirational, to the nuts and bolts of things. So Jessica, it's yours.
Thanks. I think I want to stay in aspirational. We will do lots of nuts and bolts, but when we get together as this group from all over the state, which is really part of what I love best about what Reform California is and is capable of, I'm always struck by our animating question, the question that we started this group with. Before Lee or I ever showed up, Jews across the state were asking each other, what is the California that you dream of? And what part can you play in making that future a reality for everyone in our state, not just our own communities? And it strikes me that, of course, we are not the first Jewish dreamers, that one of our forefathers was a great dreamer, Jacob, who dreamt and while dreaming heard a particular message from God, that the land on which he was resting would one day be given to him and his descendants, and they would spread out to the north and the south and the east and the west. And that place where he was sleeping was, of course, Eretz Israel. It was the land of Israel. But 5,000 years later, we, his descendants, live in another kind of a promised land, this golden state, maybe not the land of milk and honey, but the land of so much wealth and capacity and beautiful nature and incredible people and so much possibility and potential. We live in a new kind of a promised land, and we are in every corner of the state. We have Reform congregations in the north, the south, the east, and the west. And in this campaign, we have the potential to fulfill the prophecy that Jacob was also part of fulfilling, that through his descendants, they would be a blessing to all of the families of the land in which they found themselves. And we have that chance to be a blessing to all of the families in our state who are impacted by our prison system, who have children in that system, who have mothers and fathers in that system, who have loved ones in the system, and who themselves are caught up in it. It is really an incredible blessing to work with all of you on something that is so central to a vision of what is possible in California and in our world, and to do that work together as Jews. So Lee and I are going to spend a little bit of time running through the nuts and bolts of what that work might look like and what we can do together in partnership.
Great. So what we're going to do now is take 25 minutes. So we'll be done by 8:15. Everybody is welcome to stay on and join this. It's especially aimed at the lay leaders and rabbis who will be leading this work in congregations. But everybody is welcome to stay. And if you do need to go, you're welcome to leave without guilt. So in the first part, we talked about, what is this issue and what does the campaign look like in general? And now we're going to get into the specifics. And the first thing to know is that we are asking every congregation to appoint 1 or 2 point people. These are lay leaders who will work with the rabbi to learn about the campaign first, and secondly, to bring back the options for participation in Tikkun Tikvah, and to talk with your rabbi about what makes sense for your congregation. And the point people will help lead the participation from your congregation in Tikkun Tikvah, reach out to others and help them get involved. And so the first stage of this, if you're interested in being involved, this is to talk, if you're a rabbi, to talk with some of your lay leaders. If you're a lay leader, to talk to your rabbi, to help figure out who is going to be your 1 or preferably 2 point people who are going to work on this. All right? And we're going to sort of go through the 3 main actions that we'll be taking this campaign. We're going to be doing educating the Jews in our congregation to let them know how important this issue is. We're going to be reaching out to engage voters, and we are going to be gathering in Sacramento in September. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these and what it means for your congregation. If you do have questions as we go, we're not going to do a formal question and answer period in this part, but put up a question in the Q&A box, which you'll remember if you move your cursor, you'll see at the, I believe, top of your screen, somewhere on your screen. Type in a Q&A and we'll try and answer them as we go. Okay? Jess, I turn it over to you.
Thanks. So I have this, my notes are very small, so I'm sorry I'm not looking in the right direction. But there are a number of things that we are hoping congregations can do in terms of educating ourselves and each other about this issue, to get excited, to be committed, to be ready for all of the door knocking to come. And one of the most important educational goals that we have as part of this campaign is that people need to know this initiative is on the ballot and that it matters. So a piece of this is just education in our congregations to vote yes on November 8th. We are hoping that as many synagogues as possible are going to be engaging in Jewishly centered educational opportunities about the ballot initiative. These exist in a lot of different forms. All of your rabbis and cantors just got an email from me about an hour ago with details about Tisha B'Av observance and a framework for talking about this ballot initiative in the context of our day of mourning and recognition of what's broken in the world. We are also planning on creating resources for people to use at Slichot on Yom Kippur afternoon discussion groups as part of Shabbat services, or wherever you as a congregation want to frame this Jewishly, we want to help you do that. So that's one set of thinking. The other piece is to talk about it at High Holy Days, either encouraging rabbis to devote pieces of their sermons to this, or to create Yunim, the statements that frame prayer in a way that help us think about how our deepest personal words connected to God also should live in our actions and our values as we vote and as we act as citizens. So we're working with your clergy to figure out how to do that effectively. But if you're a clergy person, we're here for you. If you are not, nudge your rabbi or your cantor to think about incorporating that. Tell them it's important to you. As a former congregational rabbi, nothing was so effective actually as hearing from a congregant, this is what I need to hear from my rabbi this year. So it's a power you have and you can use. We are also planning to organize a number of prison visits in both Northern and Southern California to go both as a Jewish community to get proximate to the issue, to go in and hear stories from people who are incarcerated. And we'd like to be doing this both as a Jewish community, but also ideally in partnership across lines of class, race, and faith with other communities. So if your synagogue is in relationship with a church, mosque, or community group, whether or not they're part of an organization like PICO or IAF, if this is something you want to do with them, we want to help support you in doing that. And going together to prison and then reflecting on that experience can be a very powerful tool for engagement. Those visits should be in August and September, probably on Sundays. Lee, was there anything I missed?
No, that's great.
Okay.
I just want to respond. I know Peter Siegel and I think a couple other people asked about, this is a lot of information. Will it come out in writing? And the answer to that is yes, 100%. The first step, though, is to identify who are your congregational, your lay point people for this in each congregation. And when you let Jess and I know that, we're going to rely a lot on distributing information through the rabbis and through the point people. So that's the key to getting that information in writing, is to identify your point people. So I just want to talk about the voter engagement piece of this. Now, what we know is that the only way this is going to pass on November 8th is if the communities that are most affected by the criminal justice system turn out. We also know that these communities, which are communities of color, because our criminal justice system is not applied fairly, right? It's applied just, it has a bias, and more people of color are in jail than white people are in jail. We know these communities need to turn out because these are the same communities that have lower voter turnout. And so increasing voter turnout in communities of color is itself a racial justice issue, and it will help this measure pass. So what we are offering the opportunity is for synagogues who would like to engage in this voter engagement work, going door to door, talking to voters who don't regularly vote, doing phone banks to reach voters who don't regularly vote. We're offering you the opportunity to partner with a congregation of color. And so that you can go out together, door to door or on the phones, and talk to people about why it's voting. If you've never done it before, sometimes it sounds a little bit intimidating, but I can tell you, as someone who has done this and who has brought people from synagogues to do this, it is so exciting and empowering. Right? A lot of times we read the news and we read about the election and we feel like it's our one vote and what can we do? And when you actually go out there and engage with voters and you knock on the doors and you realize people are kind of hungry to have conversations. They don't feel like you're bothering them. They're excited to talk. It just, you feel like the process is really alive and you feel really excited that you're doing something really good. So I encourage you to think about partnering with a congregation and doing the door-to-door work or the phone banks in September and October. We're going to do a big training, one in Southern California in LA, and at least one and maybe more than one in Northern California. This is going to be probably the last Sunday in August or the second to last Sunday in August. We're still working out the dates. And there'll be like a 5 or so hour thing on a Sunday, and where we will go over what you need to know. We'll give you the message. We'll give you a chance to practice with each other so that everyone will be prepared, and then you will be able to go back and train other people in your congregation. And then the last piece of this is the most important time to do the voter engagement is the weekend before the election, the first weekend in November. And we're going to have the opportunity for every Reformed Jew in the state of California, if they choose, to help go out and talk to voters and make sure they turn out the weekend before the election. I was just speaking with some of the people that organize this today, and I said, what if we get hundreds of people to come? What if we get thousands of people to come? They said, everybody. We need everybody. They were so excited with the idea. And then I had to say, well, we're not promising anything, but we're going to do it with the best we can, right? So even if you're not able to partner with a church of color and go out in September and October, there's still the opportunity to make this available to people in your congregation. And we'll be talking more about that as we move forward. And then the third thing we're going to be doing is the statewide gathering. So this is going to be pretty exciting. We want to bring together 75 Reformed Jews or more. We want to bring together 125 or so or more people of other faiths to come together to talk about, to have a rally for this Prop 57, to build some momentum and generate some excitement to move forward. We want to see if we can have a conversation with the governor. We have indications that he's interested if his schedule will allow. But these things are always hard to resolve. But we'll know in a few weeks whether we can get that set up. We also want to do some meetings with advocates and legislative offices to say what happens beyond November 8th. Because this measure, Prop 57, is a really important first step. But there are other steps to really making a fair system. And how do we move forward beyond that? And then we're going to set up a lobby day, meetings with individual legislators to talk with them about moving forward. So this will be a really exciting experience to come together across the state and see our impact in a way that sometimes we aren't able to do. Jess?
Yes. So we have really 3 big takeaways, the next 3 things that we would like everyone on this call to do. 1, get to Lee and I the names of your congregational point people. Some congregations already have them, some not quite so much yet. So please do that work within the next couple of days. Talk to your rabbi, see who has the most excitement and who's going to be kind of the best conduit of information from the folks who are planning the campaign to the folks who are going to be implementing the campaign. 2, at that same conversation or at another one sometime in the next week, talk to your rabbi and your cantor if they're interested, and your educator too if they're interested, and figure out what your congregational plan is going to be. This should have a number of components. You should set a date for your educational program so that you're ready to teach your congregation about this issue. You should ask your rabbi about how we're going to talk about this over the holy days in a way that makes sense for your congregation. You're going to ask yourselves, do you want to partner with a congregation of color to do voter engagement in September and October? If you have that partner, you'll reach out to them. If you don't have that partner yet, we will help you find one. And then you're going to ask yourselves, do you want to participate in the Get Out the Vote work, especially that first weekend in November, the last weekend before the election, and maybe even earlier if you're ready to get going earlier. And if you want to do that, make sure that you have people who are able to come to the trainings and then set up time to train again, larger groups in your congregations. And then the third thing that we're asking you to do is to start having conversations with folks you know who you think might have been affected by this, might have a heart for this, have a vision of a California that is bigger and better than what we are experiencing, who are feeling really personally affected by the kinds of injustice that we're watching on the news all the time, and who ask, what can I do about it? We actually have a little bit of an answer. We can do this together. So think about who those folks are in your congregation and reach out directly to them. Sit down for coffee if you can and have a real conversation. And if it can't be coffee, at least a phone call and say, I know you care about this. I care about this, and here's why. And there's something that we can do together. I want you to be my partner. And invite them into the work and grow your congregational group to do work together. The very last piece is at any point along the way, as you have questions, concerns, need help, feel stuck, please get in touch with me or with Lee. Usually I cover most of the Northern California stuff and Lee covers most of the Southern California stuff, but we talk a lot. So it all goes back and forth. And you can also always post in the Reform California Facebook space if that's quicker and easier for you. But we are here to support you in this work and to help us all act powerfully together.
And I should just want to remind you, as my phone rings here, that I'm going to be sending out some sample tweets and Facebook posts immediately after this call. So please, we can kick off your participation by tweeting or posting on your Facebook page something about Tikkun Tikvah. Go ahead, Jessica.
Great. Did you want last close? He's making that sign. Oh, and we're like ahead of time, which is great. It means you gave the rabbi 2 more minutes to talk. So I got stuck with 2 inspirational moments, which is a little bit challenging. So rather than 2 totally different things, I want to build on what we said at the sort of the partway point in this call. There's something really special in the commissioning that God gave to Jacob in Genesis. What I was referring to earlier, this sort of promise to be able to spread throughout the land and to be a blessing through his family to all of the families of the earth. When it describes what Jacob is going to be doing, his descendants, they will be like dust. And the implication there is that they will be everywhere, as we are when we move through the desert. You walk away with a lot of the desert still on you. But there's a different way of thinking about this. It's the same language that's used to refer to Adam, that when Adam Harishon, the first man, was created, in Genesis 1, God took earth from Earth's 4 corners and together gave it the breath of life. And there's a midrash that says that was dirt of every color, of every type, from every location, and that all of that together went into the first man. It's part of what makes California such an incredible place to be, that we reflect that religious truth, that we are of every color, of every creed, and all together connected because of our presence and our love for this state. Our Jewish community is also of every color in ways that maybe we don't talk about as transparently or as often as we should. But engaging in work like this, it's important, I think, to remember that we're all impacted in a variety of ways. That we may not talk about the ways that our family has directly experienced the prison system, but those stories are ripe in our congregations. And we may not always talk as explicitly as we should about the people of color who are also Jews and elevate their stories and their leadership, but we should. And the more deeply we get engaged in work like this, the more we listen to our own stories, to the stories abroad in our communities, and connect to the vision that we have of the kind of Jewish community we want to be and the kind of state that we want to be and the people who we want to be in relationship. We have the opportunity to really shape the ways in which we fulfill Jacob's promise, how we will be a blessing, that we will be a blessing in who we are and in how we are as we interact, and that hopefully that kind of blessing can be scattered, not like dust exactly, more like pixie dust, more like the magic that continues to bring inspiration and love and joy, which is how we want to move through the world. And as much as we can share that in our own communities and more broadly and work together to make a difference, that I think would be such a wonderful thing to be a part of. So it is exciting to be doing that with all of you. Thank you for being on this call. Thank you to our panelists who hung in all the way through, which is really great. If you have feedback for us about how we could do this better next time, it was a maiden voyage, this webinar, so we would love to know that as well. And as questions come up about the campaign in coming days, please reach out to me or Lee or anyone you know on the leadership team. We are here for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.